welcome to Doctor Who 50 Years Ago, the show that looks back to the episode that aired this time 50 years ago in 1966, and looks at what was different between then and now. This week, The Power of the Daleks, episode 4. I am Ben.
I'm Luke.
And I'm Nick.
And let's go into the news from 1966. Special mention, last week we mentioned Castro's Cuba, and suddenly Castro croaked, which is intriguing. Let's see who dies next. On November 20th, 1966, the first instance of a spacecraft imaging an archaeological site on the moon, the Lunar Orbiter 2, it's still going, photographed Ranger 8, an earlier space probe, and its impact point in the Sea of Tranquility on the moon.
Well, this sort of relates to the recent European probe that crash landed into Mars, doesn't it?
Yes, that one that all the Twitter folks got mad about. On November 21st, a Johns Hopkins Hospital of Baltimore, Maryland, announced that it opened its gender identity clinic in July and had started accepting applications for the first sex reassignment surgery in the United States, as reported in the New York Times. So wow. This is very much a product of the younger generation identifying itself as whatever it damn well pleases, and yeah.
Wow, that's a lot earlier than I would have expected.
Me too.
Pioneers. Ah well, meanwhile, a more traditional thing. In Togo, the nation's army crushed an attempted coup against the government. On November 23rd, a group of most unorthodox businessmen in Seattle announced their plans to create a 1.5 square mile artificial island, followed by a micronation called Toluga. It collapses when the US attorney person finds out that the Cortis Bank is American territory, so they can't make it. November 24th, those rocky Beatles began recording their classic, in inverted commas, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band album, starting with Strawberry Fields Forever, if you're interested. On November 26th, just before Power of the Daleks Episode 4, the BBC broadcast some news. It had a report from Salisbury, which was the then capital of Rhodesia, on talks with Ian Smith, the Prime Minister of Rhodesia, and Bowden, who was the Secretary of State for Commonwealth Affairs, on independence. Rhodesia had declared a unilateral declaration of independence a year ago in 1965, thus angering the entire British nation and the world for having their own ideas and creating a white minority government, in contrast to all the other colonies who were meant to have governments representing the majority of peoples rather than the minority. These talks will be held in December on Gibraltar. The economic sanctions against the country for being rebellious go on, with the United Nations being supportive of a blockade. And that was the news. Hope you enjoyed it. And now we shall get on to Power of the Daleks Episode 4. Thoughts on the episode, gentlemen?
Excellent. Again, this is, at this rate, this will be one of my favourite serials of Classic Who, possibly even Doctor Who.
Mm-hmm. I've heard it said that this has the best structure of any Classic Who story ever, and the fact that so much from the first and second episodes are still coming into play now with brilliant tension. And interesting fact about this episode, my dad, whenever he talks about the Daleks, his one childhood memory of them is the ending to episode 4, when the Dalek creatures are put into the conveyor belt.
That's an excellent memory to have.
Yes, it's a very precious one that I wish I could extract out of his brain.
And use it to power a time travel machine, yes. This is a very well-paced episode. It's got so many characters that you're interested in, that you want to see become undone because of their greed and self-interest, played off against each other, whilst the Daleks play off against each other as this menacing force that the Doctor still has to defeat and still doesn't know how because it's episode 4. It's so good. It really is. So, let's go into this episode in greater detail. We open on the Daleks chanting like idiots in front of Lesterson because they are going to get their power, and they're very, very excited, which is an interesting emotion in Daleks. Lesterson has some doubts and tries to show his strength, but ultimately he's too much of a toady and gives the Daleks their power back on his own very easily breakable terms, because there's more than 3 Daleks, and yeah, they have pretty much control over the colony and all those who think they can use the Daleks for their own ends now, including the chilling line, "We understand the human mind." Oh.
Which is very excellent.
Yes, it sums up this episode. What the problem is with these humans are. It's literally their ideas. Yeah.
And I think what was fascinating about the scene as well is that actually the way that excellent line delivery by the Dalek voice people, because
Peter Hawkins.
Because they even struggle to say servant. If you notice, like the tone of the voice actually goes up when he says servant.
Yeah.
I particularly remember that sticking in my mind, going, "Wow, that is brilliant voice acting right there." The Daleks are even struggling to say servant to the humans, not just the Doctor.
Meanwhile, Bragan is showing off how much power he has over the colony, having full control over the communications relay. The Doctor intrudes because Polly's missing, and he wants him to do something about it, despite the encounter and legal argument he had with him the previous episode. But before we can have that, a noisy Dalek servant cuts through their banter to remind them of the danger that they could be exterminated any moment because they're gaining power all the time.
And again, the way that the camera's directed from the Dalek point of view is brilliant. The Doctor, whenever the camera's on the Doctor, Patrick Troughton is acting his socks off. He always looks terrified, doesn't he? It's almost like maybe Dalek, the TV episode with the Doctor being so terrified, was almost inspired by this, perhaps.
I'm seeing so many parallels between this and Dalek.
Yeah, it's just almost as if Christopher Eccleston looked at the way Patrick Troughton looks terrified and mimicked it beautifully. Bragan continues to show how much power he has when Hensel, who is via a filmed insert because he's not in this episode, oh well, calls him to say, "Are you running the colony all right?" And Bragan says, "Yes, I am." And then a Dalek comes in to menace and insecure him and the audience by offering everybody liquid.
Again, I've noted that the subplot's continuing, making sure that you know that the Bragan subplot is in your mind for later in the episode. Brilliantly paced. Everything is just... It's a complicated serial, but everything is just at the right moment. It comes back to remind you that this is going to be important later on.
Including the Daleks, including the music. Yep. It's all set up rather beautifully. And remember, 50 years later, the whole Daleks serving you liquid will be played for laughs.
Well,
because the Daleks aren't scary anymore, to the point where they're all colours of the rainbow. Meanwhile, with the rebels, their agenda intertwines with Ben and the Doctor talking about the flaws, because it's going to be an important plot point later, kiddies, and an increasing number of Daleks stroll along the corridor, seeing them rolling and hating, because nobody's counting the number of death machines about. And we also set up the notice board code, because why not?
It's a shame that in all of the promotional material surrounding the animation release, the Dalek conveyor belt bit is one of their big ploys. And I think it's a shame, because that's one of the big oh my god moments in the serial. There's loads of them. And so when you go in knowing that, and it's obviously you'll be suspecting it, but knowing it with such certainty, it kills the immensity of it.
I guess it's because they're expecting most people to be buying them to have already watched the recon, or at least know about it. Even I knew about the Dalek production line without having even...
Also, the BBC are terrible with trailers. And then the main part of the episode starts, in which Lesterson starts having a breakdown and can't be stopped by the domineering Janley or by the Doctor, who merely increases his madness.
But it's interesting to see that he utters the specific line of that human life is more important than the Dalek experience. So it does show that actually he is just being very naive. He's not.
Yeah, he's been carried away.
Yeah, he's not amoral. He isn't lacking in the morality department. He was only doing what he thought was best for the colony, I guess, and for his own almost childish scientific curiosity.
That carries on with the line, your carelessness is the cause of Reson's death. It's not that he's being evil, as he later calls the Daleks. It's that he's just so wrapped up in what he's doing, he hasn't stopped to think about anything else.
There's another great line coming up. We can connect it to all these scientific discoveries and how all these, if you keep discovering new things and you get too carried away, like a younger generation could do, perhaps, they could end up leading themselves to another destructive war or something like that. But then there's this line by Janley that scientific discovery can't stop dead. So that's their counter-argument, that if we don't continue these scientific discoveries, we're not going to get anywhere as the human race. We need to continue exploring. Whereas the older generation, the ones who have been through the hell, are arguing, yes, but if you go too fast, you'll end up dead. Like we almost did. So yeah, Janley continues her power play over Lesterson to try and keep him quiet, so she can use the Daleks for her own rebellious ends. But then the Doctor and Ben come in. They're a bit too late. But they manage to exacerbate Lesterson's collapse by giving him the terrifying possibility that the Daleks are reproducing themselves, which is the most horrible sentence ever.
I think also it's very important here that in episode 1, the cliffhanger, we saw that the Daleks definitely have a creature inside them. I know it had been established in the Daleks, the original serial, that there were creatures of hate inside, but this is just making sure that any of the youngest viewers would know there's definitely an alien in there.
They're trying to differentiate the Daleks from themselves, because, surprisingly enough, creatures of hate could reproduce more creatures of hate, and it could continue by a bypass cycle of generations. So it's that attempt to dehumanise the Daleks, when in fact the Daleks are more human than you could possibly imagine. Because remember, they're Nazis! Elephant in the room. Blimey. Moving back to the greatest corridors in Doctor Who history, because they don't get run up and down in, but rather they add to the tension, because the Daleks just roll by every now and again, reminding the audience that there's a lot of Daleks about and they could kill you at any moment. But this is when we decipher the notice board code and the Doctor and Ben get to see what the rebels are doing, which is try and stage a revolution using the Dalek weaponry, which is a terrible idea. And
this is meant to represent how in seeking to kind of force change, you can end up becoming as bad, if not worse, than the previous regime. That they resorted to such extreme measures that they are no better. That surely the ruling regime can't be that bad.
But the Daleks exert their control over the fearful rebels because, surprisingly enough, they're concerned that these weapons could kill them.
Mm.
So Jan Lee says, they won't kill me, and the Daleks don't, because they realise that they could keep her alive, gain the trust of the rebels, and then murder them later.
Mm. I think this whole that they're so desperate to affect change. Almost, I would read it from a 60s perspective. I would imagine they think of it as akin to the communist threat. You know, communists obviously seeing a very corrupt regime wanting to topple it, but replacing it with something that isn't necessarily better, but having in their minds the moral superiority even if they don't have it. So it's almost playing off that Cold War fear, I think.
I'm going to counter you. It's a colonial thing. Let me tell you why. Because Quinn, in a later scene, says, the governor's popular. So, if the governor's popular, this means that the rebels are in a minority. They're the white minority government from Rhodesia. That's who they are, trying to effect a revolution and go against the British way, and they're going to end up worse, somehow. That's what I've got in my head.
Well, I mean, and the brilliance of this narrative is that there are so many interpretations you can take of it that are equally viable, and yet it still makes complete sense. The best pieces of fiction allow you to think on a higher level like that, don't they? In multiple ways.
Yeah. So, Ben gets himself captured, and the Doctor discovers that Bragan is leader of the rebels. Shock horror. Now he's got everything, and he's about to make himself dictator general. The Daleks nearly lose their mask again by almost killing him, but they don't. Just. Meanwhile, Bragan exercises his power over the Doctor because he's not the real examiner, and he's going to play that card to keep him out of the way whilst he uses the Daleks to win a revolution. And with that, the Doctor's locked up next to Quinn.
I think the scene where he empties his pockets, it's very much, I've written here, the beginning of the trope of where whenever he gets captured, he always empties his pockets. You know, it happens in Genesis of the Daleks, or various other times when he's in a bit of a pickle, he needs something, he'll have infinitely deep pockets by the looks of it.
The Sontan experiment.
Yeah, exactly. I think this very much shows that Troughton, the second Doctor, is the beginning of what we would consider, I guess, the modern Doctor, because Hartnell's interpretation of the Doctor is very different to most of the others, I would say.
Yeah. So yeah, the Doctor's locked up, and there's a dog barking in the background because it's a joke about Sonics. Haha! Anyway, we're going to get on to, of course, the best scene in this episode, the cliffhanger. The build-up is magnificent, where Lesterson slowly takes us through the Dalek spaceship to discover that they are conspiring together and reproducing in a scene full of lovely tension. Oh my god, they are evil! So here's a Dalek production line to truly terrify children in the audience of the mass army that has been created simply by giving them a tiny little bit of power, all because of scientific curiosity and self-interest.
Yeah, and the idea of them being manufactured in that way is very creepy. Isn't it? Wouldn't you say that?
Yeah.
These are living beings, and yet they can be manufactured almost whenever you want. That's unbelievably creepy. And the description it gives, anyway, in the recon, makes it sound pretty. It all feels very. I imagine it must have been suitably terrifying to the children at home.
Dialing back a bit, the they are evil realization. I think there's something very post-war black and white about that line.
Yeah.
There is the very simple, they are the Reds and we are the capitalists. and we're good for that. It's because until at least the late 50s, you still had heavy propaganda. People weren't going full critical until the late 60s, early 70s. And so the fact that he is able to break down his enemy into just the evil, despite the fact that the Daleks are really, it still shows that very simple, the enemy is evil mindset that is incredibly propaganda post-war.
Another interpretation to this, it's possibly one of my favourite lines in this episode. It's one of my many favourites in this entire serial. The first Dalek to start up the chant of "We are the new race of Daleks." He doesn't say that. He says something like "We are the new world" or something like that, and that's a terrifying ideal that this is what this old generation have created. They've created through their self-interest, through their scientific curiosity, but also through their apathy, through their failing to check the potential of this new generation, that they could kill them all. It creates this new world, this new race of Daleks, and shows the audience the danger of standing idly by. This new world will punish you for your mistakes. It's quite terrifying.
Yeah.
Because the Daleks are preparing to kill them all.
Well, that's interesting because nowadays, looking at the latest Brexit referendum, it was largely decided by the older generation. Now they're the ones deciding what the new world will be, even though they're not going to be the ones to live in it.
Yeah. I guess you could say in the 60s, it very much felt like the younger generation are the ones with the power, and that same generation have managed to keep hold of it. Really,
I'd argue that the younger generation, when given the power, accidentally created the techniques to let the older generation take power again, i.e. medical advancements and stuff like that.
Okay, that makes sense. So that when they were younger, they invented these great things, and then that suddenly keeps
That's
them
come to kick them in the arse. Yeah. So that's how
not so much then.
Yeah, it's an interesting reversal. But that's what we're here to look at. These weird, interesting reversals from 50 years ago to today. And hopefully, long may those interpretations continue, especially into the rest of Season 4, which we will be covering, folks. Thank you very much for watching. You can find us on Blogspot, which redirects to iTunes. We are also on Facebook and other internety things. If you've randomly found the podcast, well done you, thank you. Leave a comment and all that jazz. We'd also be on YouTube, where you can also like, comment and subscribe. And maybe if you want to do Google+, why not? It's your thing. Yes, thank you very much for watching. We'll be back with Power of the Daleks episode 5 next week for more Doctor Who 50 years ago. I've been Ben.
I've been Luke.
And I've been Nick.
Thank you, and goodbye.